That's weird. Okay, I think we should maybe get things started. Make the most of our hour that we have together. Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Lauren House. I'm the managing director at the Doc Institute. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. This is our first Meet the Funder of 2024. And thanks to TVO for joining us. I'm also joined by our co-host from Doc National, Sarah Spring, and Natasha Negrea. I'd like to start off actually by taking a moment to honor and reflect the land that we are on. And I know many of you may be in other parts of the land and not in Toronto. So wherever you are, I'd like to acknowledge that Doc Institute is located on the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. Ontario itself is covered by 46 treaties and agreements and is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, including Inuit and Métis. These treaties and other agreements, including the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, are agreements to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect and peace and friendship. And of course, we're mindful of the broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. And we're all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or past generations. And some of us came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And I also think it's important to acknowledge beyond our borders, the many Indigenous people around the globe who have been and are currently being forcibly displaced from their traditional lands as well. And we also invite you to explore. I think Warren will put in the chat the Native Land Digital, which is a website that strives to create and foster conversations about the history of colonialism, Indigenous ways of knowing, and settler Indigenous relations through educational resources on the map. It creates a space where non-Indigenous people can be invited and challenged to learn about the lands that they inhabit and the history of the lands, how to be actively part of a better future going forward. And we're grateful to be working and sharing on this land. I want to also thank and acknowledge the support of Ontario Creates. They are our supporter for our industry development initiatives at the Doc Institute. And just to give you a sense of the hour ahead of us, we're going to pass it over to Natasha and Alexandra, who will give us sort of an overview of all things TVO. And Sarah and I will enter into some discussion. Please post your questions into the Q&A box and keep your audio muted. But feel free to keep all your cameras on so we can see everybody. And just also note that this is being recorded. And again, I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists. We have with us Natasha Negrea, who is head of programming with TVO, where she's responsible for the overall direction and evolution of documentaries, children's programming. This includes oversight of TVO's slate of award-winning commissions and acquisitions and building the strategy for scheduling and distribution on broadcast, OTT, and digital platforms. Natasha has had a robust career in screen content, including serving as a development executive with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and as producer with Blue Ant Media. And she has previously led programming at Women in Film Television Toronto. So welcome, Natasha. And Natasha is joined by Alexandra Roberts, who's commissioning editor of documentaries at TVO, where she oversees all of the broadcaster's original commissions, acquisitions, and pre-buys. She's had a decade of experience producing ambitious, forward-thinking stories for film and television, both in scripted and documentary. Her work has aired internationally on several networks, including HBO, Hulu, Netflix, Peacock, CBC, Arte, NHK, Discovery, and Al Jazeera English. She's recently served on the production team for the second season of Children Ruin Everything for Roku and CTV. And her first scripted feature, Soft, premiered at TIFF in 22 and toured across Canada, where it won Best of Fest at Chilliwack International Film Festival and made its international premiere and released theatrically by Level Film in 23. And also for her work on Soft, she was awarded she was a 2022 nominee of the CMPA Indie Screen Producers Awards. She holds a Master's of Arts in Media Studies from the New School, a Bachelor of Arts from McGill University, and is alumna of the Producers Lab at the Canadian Film Centre. So again, welcome to both of you for joining us. And let me just pass it over to the two of you to take it away in terms of updates and what's happening at TVO.
Thank you, Lauren. So I'm head of programming at TVO. I've been at TVO previously in a couple of other roles, but I've been in this role since about July. So Docs is one of the two content streams that I oversee. And I work really closely with Alexandra, who manages that team, and works on all of the commissions and is across all of the acquisitions as well, which we can get into. And I'm going to pass it to Alexandra momentarily, but I think the biggest thing is to acknowledge that we're undergoing a lot of change right now. Obviously, the industry at large, the documentary industry, and then certainly at TVO. We're really trying to think digital first as much as we can to build our audience. We're facing the same challenges, as everybody when it comes to content. And then specifically on the Docs team, we've just had a lot of personnel changes. So I know there might be people joining us today who have had previous relationships with people on the Docs team or are wondering who to contact for what. And so we'll, make sure that we update you on all of that. And then obviously, let you know that we are still very committed to feature-length documentary film, as well as other documentary type of formats.
What can I say? I will say there has been a lot of change, just to echo what Natasha has said. But our mandate still remains very much the same, right? Like, we're still an educational institution, we're a social impact organization. That means that pretty much everything we bring in-house has to be enriching in some capacity, right? So we want there to be some kind of takeaway at the end of the viewing experience. We want our projects to be either participating in a current social discourse, or even better, starting their own discourse. We're actively looking right now toward our 2024 slate, obviously waiting to see what our SAMF envelope is going to be. So we're not pulling the trigger yet on any new projects, but we're looking for series, singles, features. Our focus is still on, POV, social justice films, current affairs, but we're also very open to new ideas and new approaches. We want to think really holistically about what the viewing experience is like, making sure that we're using all of the tools in a filmmaker's toolkit, right? Whether that's like an interesting visual approach, using sound in a dynamic and new and fun way. We talk all the time about fun, new, sometimes even strange projects that we encounter. And we're very open to receiving new kinds of ideas that maybe people haven't thought about pitching us before. Does that help answer some of maybe get ahead of some of the questions that some of the folks in the room might have?
Well, there are a few questions. Did you guys want to keep presenting, or should we dive into some of the questions that have already come up?
I would say we could dive in. I have a feeling people will know TVO if we find the questions, need us to go a bit more in depth, and I think we can do so. Does that work for everyone?
I think that's good. I mean, I think, obviously the first question that pops up is approaching TVO. So what, I guess, are people approaching you, Alexandra, first? What are you looking for? How big of a proposal do you want to see? How much do you want to see about the filmmaker, past work? What does that pitch package look like if they're coming to you?
So are we talking about an acquisition or are we talking about a commission?
Well, I think it would be great if you could talk about both. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So on the acquisition side, we currently have Shane Smith, formerly of Hot Docs, consulting with us on a temporary part-time basis while we make decisions around who our new team is going to be comprised of. He is fantastic, as I'm sure all of you already know. So I would say if you're a filmmaker looking to pitch us for an acquisition, we have a newly created doc submissions email that we're filtering a lot of our submissions through for the sake of imbuing our submissions with some type of process. I think a lot of the time, historically, because our team had been in place for so long, a lot of individuals just had their emails already, but we're really trying to consolidate some of that intake. It also helps just to keep us honest and sane on the doc side, to be totally transparent. We're a small team and we want to make sure that nothing gets lost in the mix. So I would say, and frankly, I think that also can apply to commissions. Like if you have a commission or a project that you're interested in having us commission, we have a doc submissions email. It's on our website. Our coordinator, Abby, very diligently tracks all of those things. And in terms of what we're looking for, it kind of depends on the acquisition side versus the commissioning side. On the acquisition side, obviously, if you have footage for us to look at, the finished project, even a teaser just in the early stages, what kind of rights are available on it, if you've already sold it elsewhere, who have you sold it to, the date, any awards, bios about yourself and your team is also really helpful. Some projects come with EPKs and that's handy. We don't necessarily expect to have EPKs. On the commissioning side, I would say it's a little bit project dependent, but overall, if you're going to be submitting a project, one thing that we will definitely want to know off the top is it a series? Is it a film? Is it a single? If it's a series, how many episodes? I know this sounds super, super obvious, but you'd be surprised how many pitches we get that don't actually state the format, which kind of leaves us in a position of having to guess. We'd much rather you just let us know what kind of project you have in mind. In that package, we will often ask for bios about the team, where you're at, if there's any financing in place, that's also really helpful. We have a lot of this information still on the TVO website as well, so feel free to reference that, and it includes a pretty fulsome list of the things that are helpful for us to get. So if you want to double check, it exists in writing elsewhere. And I would also say, we exist in a visual medium. So if you have reference images that help to give us a flavor of the type of project you're looking to make, that's also really helpful. Sometimes people will send us teasers and that can be beneficial as well, depending on the teaser. I think that about covers it. Natasha, anything I'm missing?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I mean, that covers it very well, but a couple additional things are, depending on what the project is, if you already have a pitch deck, that's fantastic. But if you have just a Word document that's bullet points, that's also fine, especially if you think it might be outside of what we normally look at. We would still want to know who the team is, what the project is, and all of that stuff. The two things that I think really should be in there, even if it's just a sentence, is what's the audience?
Yes.
You know, very few pitch decks include that, and it's really important. And the second one, and very experienced producers were shocked when I said this matters. I kid you not, a lot of pitches come in without contact information in the pitch deck. And
Yeah.
I think it's because people are like, well, the email came from me. But we have to save these all somewhere and track them. And also, who knows, maybe I decide to go on vacation for a few months and not come back, which wouldn't happen. But you need to make sure that if someone just comes across your proposal and is really excited about it, that they know how to find you. So please just put that in there.
Yes, that is so true. And I would also say if you do have a teaser, please don't bury it. The number of times we've almost missed looking at teasers because they're either buried somewhere in the body of an email, or they're in like size 9 font on the second last page in the middle of another sentence, or what have you. You know, we really want to make sure that we're not missing those things. So if you have a package that you're sending us, please don't be shy about really highlighting the fact that you have a teaser for us to look at, because it would be a shame if you put the work into making it and we don't even have a chance to evaluate it.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that's really helpful. And I wonder if I can just follow up on, can you talk a little bit about how regularly you're meeting to discuss greenlighting? What's the expected wait time when someone sends in a project?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're meeting, I would say right now, monthly. We take pitches all the time, every day, multiple times a day, and we file them. And then we will typically come together for a pretty fulsome meeting to look at the pitches that we think are real, that really fit with us at TVO, and could be something that would be worth acting on in terms of next steps. In terms of our turnaround time, can really depend. You know, we're a smaller team than we typically are, and so we're taking longer right now to get back to folks than I envision we will moving forward. If you go onto our website, it will say we may take up to like 8 weeks for a response. We're really endeavoring to take up to 8 weeks to get back to people. It can take longer, and I'm sorry, it's really not a lack of desire in getting back to people. It's just frankly a math problem. It's like how many hours are there in a day, essentially. It's something that I'm anticipating will shrink once we have the rest of the docs team in place.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And in terms of the license fees, can you give a little bit of a range for acquisitions and also for commissions?
Natasha, we're going to say something.
So look, that changes and it's project dependent. I'd say for commissions, it could ranges anywhere from about like 60 to 80 per hour of content. Sometimes that license fee will be a little bit more for a feature. It also depends on threshold and other financing. And, with series, it's very unlikely that we'd be able to come in, for 100K for every episode, just because we have a finite budget. So I'd say it depends on the project, but we're in, that range. And then on the acquisitions front for feature length Canadian films, it's between 8 to 10K, and then a bit higher than that for pre-buys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then in terms of the Ontario focus, obviously you're TV Ontario. And so in terms of where the story is set, where the team is set, where the producer is set, like what's the interplay of that in terms of when you're analyzing a project? Do all three of those have to weigh pretty heavily, or can you work with a story outside of Ontario, a production team? How does that impact you?
I mean, I would say all three. Natasha, feel free to chime in, but we will always have a real interest and a real focus on Ontario specific stories and stories that are buy-in for Ontarians, but we also want to make sure that we're not missing great stories that are still of relevance to people who live in Ontario, right? Like we are a multifaceted community here, and we're incredibly diverse. And I would also say, all of our programming will land on our YouTube and land on our, our OTT and our website, and that reaches everyone in Canada. And so we want to make sure that we're mindful of that as well.
Yeah, and I also just want to add that totally, agree with everything Alexandra said. It's really about relevance, but it's also about the whole slate. I've always thought this way, and Alexandra and I speak all the time, and we see it as having a well-rounded slate. So while we do look at projects from creative teams all across Canada, with our commissions, obviously with acquisitions all over the world, and stories elsewhere, we wouldn't want a slate that's entirely comprised of those. We're always going to want some Ontario stories as well. Same thing with format. So that's part of it too. So I think one thing I've always tried to be really careful with is that we can't expect every project to do everything we're trying to do, as long as we're doing everything we're trying to do in some way.
Okay, thanks so much. And then in terms of formats, what's the balance of one-offs to features to series and even shorts? I mean, you're thinking about digital first, so I'm assuming that there's maybe a bit of flexibility in terms of the lengths. Can you talk a bit about how you have envisioned your 2024 slate in terms of the balance of those different formats of documentary?
Yeah, we still have to wait to see what we get envelope wise, and that will certainly have an influence on how the slate takes shape. That being said, I'll go off of what we have for 2023. We have a lot of features, I would say. We've definitely got a series in there. We've got a single as well. And we're looking for, I would say, a mix next year, right, of all three of those things. And I can't say with certainty what the ratios of each will be, because what we're really looking for when it comes down to it is just like a great slate of programs that resonate with people.
And to add to that, we're known through many years for our POV feature-length documentary films, and that commitment has not changed. So we're going to continue to support those with the 2023 slate, which we haven't fully announced yet. It's like predominantly feature-length documentary, which is really exciting. So we're not saying that the next year it would be like a whole bunch of series and one feature-length doc. That's not going to happen. It's just a matter of, there might be a couple more series next year, and then the year after, maybe it'll be, a lot of films. In terms of short form, right now that actually sits on the digital team. So people who might be applying to the TELUS Fund or the Bell Fund would want to connect with the digital team at TVO. Lori Few oversees that team. We do often weigh in, and there, could be times where something could sit between us, and we would be sort of touching on that content in a way, because we'd be programming it and scheduling it. Even though it's YouTube first, we would probably air it on broadcast as well. But for now, that's sitting with a different team, and they tend to focus a bit more on current affairs. But that being said, there are a couple of arts projects coming up that they've collaborated on. So it really depends on the project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks so much. And in terms of the teams, are you open to working with first-time filmmaking teams? Are you focusing more on veteran teams? Like, how much does that play into it?
It's really both. I think we're really excited that we get to work with a mix of different kinds of teams with different levels of experience. One thing that I will say is that if you're coming to us as a brand new film team, we really encourage you to partner with a more seasoned producer. It just ends up setting everyone else up for success, right? Like, you set yourself up for success. It makes for a smoother production workflow, among other things. So, and we would also want to make sure that we have a sense of who that person is that you're partnering with, and that they're really on board. It's not a checkbox exercise.
Okay, thank you. And another question about the teams. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the equity policies at TVO. Do you have something in mind when you're thinking about your slate in terms of the representation that you want to have on the team? on screen? Are there any targets and thresholds that you guys are looking at? And also just how you're tracking that work at the network.
Yeah, absolutely. So Natasha, you look, you were going to say something and I don't want to step on your.
Well, that's okay. I was going to just say something about tracking. Yeah, I'm not on mute. Something about tracking that relates to both kids and docs, and my headphone flew out, so I hope you can hear me. Which is, yes, we're starting to ask everybody for sort of a diversity breakdown of their teams because we don't want to be making any assumptions. So that will more and more often be, you know, part of what we're asking for, which I know other networks such as CBC ask for as well. And then our diversity policy differs based on the content streams and is also constantly evolving, of course. So there's something that applies now, but we're constantly talking about it. Alexandra, I'll let you walk everyone through that.
I mean, I think you pretty much covered it, right? Like we are really excited that the slate that we have from 2023 is incredibly diverse in a number of different ways. And for us, it honestly wasn't a checkbox exercise. It was really with the purpose of making sure that our slate felt well-rounded and that the stories that we were helping to tell felt like they each had a unique place on TVO and also on our slate and also out in the world. We have a diversity policy and it's on our website right now if you'd care to dig deeper into some of those finer details. But as Natasha said, you know, we're constantly talking about, you know, the well-roundedness of our slate from a diversity standpoint. And those conversations continue to evolve every day, just as the conversations that happen in everyday life, you know, continue to evolve.
And just to add to that, of course, it's a bit of a complicated policy, which is why Alexandra's pointing you to the site. But yeah, we're trying to do better and better every year. We know that there's more work to do. We're really excited to hear from diverse creators. And we also talk about the definition of diversity all the time. You know, often we're not getting projects, so we need to work harder at talent discovery. We recognize that. One thing that's really exciting is, you know, first of all, that we have the most projects in development for 2023 than I think the docs team ever has had. We have 7 projects in development. And I actually believe 5 out of the 7 are diverse, 4 out of the 7 being BIPOC owned productions. So, you know, we're working harder and harder at it. So, you know, and again, it's ongoing. It's not like we're like, oh, this work is done.
No, it's just that constant work of like self-interrogation and really looking at your slate and also keeping your ear to the ground, right? Like what are the conversations that people are having, not just within the film community, but out in the world around you every day. And we view diversity as being not just like your key creative team, but also, yes, like who's in front of the camera and the subject matter and the pairing of like who is telling which story and why.
And are you also thinking about regional diversity across the province? So when you're looking at, you know, Ontario focus stories, are you trying to really reach out to, for example, Northern Ontario or maybe some of the smaller communities outside the GTA?
Yes, definitely. We're always looking at incorporating a variety of different perspectives, and that includes a non-Toronto centric perspective. I know that I'm a born and raised Torontonian, and I'm guilty of thinking that, you know, we're the center of the universe. We're definitely not. And we don't have everything, you know, we're not the be all end all of Ontario. So we're really excited that we have a couple projects that are in production right now that are looking at a whole range of Ontarian experiences that are not Toronto focused.
And just to add, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I did see a couple questions come in. We absolutely look for and encourage production teams from outside of Toronto in Northern Ontario to come to us. We have had projects outside of Northern Ontario as well. You know, it's something that we're always looking at is where is this project coming out of. So just to let you know, we are of course very open and encourage you to please submit.
Great. And then in terms of collaborations, because obviously TVO has a history of collaborating with other networks to help put a project together. So, you know, in the past, there's been lots of collaborations with Knowledge Network, for example. There is sort of ongoing never-ending question about whether, you know, PBS can be a part of the structures. So anyway, maybe you can just mention where you're at with some of those collaborative partnerships on a project.
Yeah, I'll start. Natasha, if you want to chime in as always. We still work really, really well with Knowledge, and we have some projects where Knowledge has come in as a second window, and we have a really collaborative and productive relationship. We want that to continue, and I foresee that continuing. We have some, you know, Treaty International co-pros that we're in production on right now, one with Germany. We're very open to continuing with that as well. I think it's always going to depend on that combination of like, who is the team, what is the project, and who are you partnering with and why. In terms of PBS, yes, the bleed through is real, and we have that conversation on our side too. You know, it's kind of a delicate dance that we're kind of addressing on a case-by-case basis. I'm sorry, that's not the answer that maybe some people are looking for, but that's the reality.
I would say it's not a deal breaker. And just to add to that, I would say, yes, Knowledge is a part, you know, has been a partner for a long time. We continue to work with them. It tends to be that they come on a second window. Other local broadcasters, because I know everyone's always struggling to find other broadcasters if there's a threshold issue. You know, we've worked with many. We've worked with APTN. You know, I just had a great chat with Out TV. There could be some opportunities there. There's always opportunities with French Canada as well, TFO and SRC. You know, I think it's obvious which partners might not work for us in terms of English broadcasters having the same show at the same time. We're also open to coming in on second window. So we had, you know, we were second window to, I believe we were second window to AMI on Employable Me, which is an amazing documentary series that was a commission for us. It's case by case. I think the thing that we're trying to avoid, especially as we really continue to pursue, you know, our digital strategy, is that it would have to be a very, very special case for us to commission something where it's available elsewhere in English Canada online as well. So that's something to think about.
And also, can you expand a little bit? So you started off talking about you're thinking about digital first. So maybe a little bit more about what that means in terms of, you know, obviously there's a lot of conversations around discoverability, the content, you want to make sure that it's not getting lost amongst a sea of other content. So how does that, what does digital first, I guess, mean for you? And then what kind of strategies do you have around, you know, getting eyeballs onto those films?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's an evolving conversation that we have every day, multiple times a day, with each other and folks in other departments. I think when we think of digital first, what we're really thinking about is creating content that reaches audiences that access their content digitally and engage in stories in a digital way. I know that some people think that that inherently means shorter, but that's actually not always the case. You know, what we found is that a lot of viewers are actually watching our long form documentaries on TVO, I mean, on YouTube, but on their television. With that in mind, we're trying to experiment smartly and strategically about what that means and how we're able to reach audiences. So one thing that we've started to do, for example, in the case of some of our TVO originals, but even certain acquisitions, is putting them up on YouTube in 4K because it makes a difference, right? And we think it's also nice for the audience, but also for the filmmaker, right? And I've had filmmakers approach me and say, you know, I've shot my film in 4K, but I have to deliver to you in 1080i. Is there anything you can do with my 4K footage? And now I'm very happy to be able to say that the answer sometimes is yes, we can. Does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, and I guess the other question is discoverability. So I know you said you're a small team and, you know, there's only so much resources that can be put on that. But when you are trying to drive audiences to your digital platform, what can filmmakers expect as the sort of like TVO's collaboration in their outreach work?
Yeah, well, I would consider us to be quite collaborative. We have an audience development team whose sole mission is to ensure that our content is as discoverable as possible. We have someone who's really lovely that works just with the docs team on trying to drive social engagement across all of our platforms. So for us, that is the company formerly known as Twitter, now X, Facebook and Instagram, not TikTok as of right now, but who knows what the future has in store. We also, as of a few days ago, brought on a digital channel specialist, which we're very excited about. And that is someone whose job is really to ensure discoverability. They live and breathe YouTube as well as our other digital platforms. And they're embedded within the docs team, which we're incredibly excited about because very often those roles kind of exist outside of the more content-driven, editorially driven departments. But I felt like, and Natasha also felt like it was really important that this individual was actually an embedded member of the docs team who was focused entirely on our content and understanding the competitive landscape as well.
Thank you. And then in terms of back to the topics question, I know, you're open to many different types of films and, obviously the beating heart has often been the sort of POV projects, but science, nature, sports, like, is there any focus or is anything that people should know that you're definitely not interested in?
Is there anything that we're not interested in? I don't think that there's anything that I can think of that we're absolutely not interested in. I think one area that we continue to talk about is true crime and whether there's a world where TVO could ever do true crime. We have not at this point. Our focus continues to be on POV, social justice, current affairs, and those kinds of projects. I would say in terms of topics that we're really excited about, we're looking for areas that can reach a very interesting kind of cross-section of different audiences, right? I think one good example would be like sports, for instance. Another that we've identified could be like food. One of our food-specific docs we've noted has done incredibly well, and that's not a coincidence. Another area that we think is one that we're interested in exploring further would be music. For example, we've done some really wonderful music docs in the past, like Picture My Face about Teenage Head, and we're very open to that as well. That being said, it doesn't mean that that we wouldn't be interested in a film about a different topic.
And just to add to that, we see ourselves as a social impact organization. So really, we want to be collaborating on content and helping get eyeballs on content that are, asking important questions that are part of conversations, as Alexandra said, that are, shining a light on, unrepresented communities. And so we're still very much, looking at even more sort of traditional subject matter, if I can say that. But I think we want to let people know that we're also open to things that TVO might not have been looking at before. And sports is a great example where you can tell a story that is about equality, that is about, a social movement, about a moment in time, very, very well through sport. There are some great examples out there, like Copa 71 or Australian Dream that came out of the ABC that, would feel, in my view, very TVO. These are smart social impact films, essentially, but, they're it told through, the lens of people's heroes. So I'd say that we're just more open-minded. And in terms of things like true crime or other topics like that, it's really about it has to be told in a way that makes sense for us and that is on mandate. So, there's probably a lot of things that wouldn't work for us because that's not what the best version of that series or film would be. And we don't want to shoehorn it in for it to be TVO. It has to be something that makes sense. That's, smart and offering a fresh perspective. So I'd say it's more around angle.
Yeah, and genre conventions, right? Like there's actually something really exciting about a social impact kind of film that maybe uses the the conventions of a true crime. Like that's not something that we've necessarily seen yet, but we'd certainly be open to it.
Thank you. And then in terms of Indigenous filmmakers, Indigenous storytelling, maybe you could just talk a little bit about your approach to working with Indigenous storytellers, how Indigenous narrative sovereignty works into how you work at TVO, what types of relationships are you guys building with these filmmaking communities, and what do you want to say to Indigenous filmmakers to, let them know about what it's like to work with TVO?
Yeah, that's a really important question. You know, Natasha and I are really excited about the fact that 2 of the projects that we currently have in development are Indigenous-led projects about Indigenous subject matter. And I would say that that is holistically the approach that we're taking as we move forward with Indigenous projects, right? It's like, we really want to make sure that they know that we're here as creative collaborators and partners, and we're here to help them advocate for the stories that they feel are important, and also offer them a perspective on, I would say, the discoverability aspect of it as well. Like, we have the resources in-house to collect data that is really valuable that might not be accessible to an independent filmmaker sort of working solo. And I've been on the other side of that table and have tried to collect that data myself, and it is exhausting and kind of impossible. I would also say, it's really important to us when working with Indigenous filmmakers that they feel set up for success. And we're open to working with both seasoned and emerging Indigenous film teams. We have a really great relationship with the folks over at Res Pix, for example. We have a project with them in production right now. What else can I tell you, Natasha? Am I missing anything here?
I think the main thing really is that we want people to be telling their own stories. So
Yeah.
I think especially when it comes to Indigenous creators, we're excited to hear from people. We want to hear from new and emerging creators. Absolutely. Our priority is for those, the rights to be owned by Indigenous creatives. We're happy to support in ways we can. We also acknowledge that often those projects will, would be, best approached with potentially different protocols than we might be involved in on other projects. We're also open to hearing protocols that have worked previously. And just, looking for those projects is a big priority for us. And I'd say, again, it's part of an evolving conversation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And then another question that, looking at immigrant communities in Ontario and, just all of these stories about, first or second generation Canadians, is that something that you guys see wanting to kind of, expand on a little bit with your slate next year? Or is that, what's the balance of those types of stories that you're looking for?
Stories about or by immigrant communities?
Well, I think both. I think that, a lot of doc members are making films about their communities. They're part of diasporic communities. So when we're looking at, really just like different content across the province, are you guys thinking about how to, prioritize and sort of seek out filmmakers who are first or second gen, who want to make films about their communities in Ontario?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're really making an effort to make sure that we follow up with those kinds of filmmakers, right? Sometimes it may not be a fit for us for one reason or another, but I want to make sure that they know that we're still accessible and that it doesn't necessarily mean they can never pitch to us again. That's in fact the opposite of what we want. I think for us, it's always going to be about what is the story in particular within that particular community.
And I just also want to add that actually that's been a big part of, TVO's content for years. So we actually do get a lot of those proposals and we make a lot of those projects. So going back some time, Migrant Dreams, Little India, I think it's also Village of Dreams. Sorry, I might be getting the colon part of the title wrong. We actually have a couple in production or in post-production right now. We had Big Fight Little Chinatown. So
Yeah.
we do hear from a lot of those filmmakers. They're important stories. We've supported those filmmakers, and we will continue to. We're in production on Saigon Story with the NFB right now, which is it's a second gen story. But yeah, I mean, I imagine that would continue because that's the story of so many people in Canada and Ontario.
Yeah. And I would also say that like each one of those stories that Natasha referenced is very unique unto itself, right?
And I have a question about, working with filmmakers who are living with a disability or neurodiverse.
Mhm.
There's a lot of conversations around different ways of pitching or presenting projects to you, and then also different ways of working, and of course, different subject matter. So, yeah, just curious because you guys spoke about, there's, people are going to send in pitch decks, and there's certain emails and stuff. Are you open to video pitches? Is there other types of ways that you're looking to receive documentation from filmmakers who are potentially neurodiverse, have different ways of talking about their projects? And then in terms of the content, are you guys thinking about these topics as topics that you want to look into this year?
Yes. Yes to everything. No, I'm not just going to say that as my answer. But yeah, we've been having those conversations about, the fact that 25% of Canadians self-identify as having a disability, and that includes both visible and invisible disabilities. I personally would be very open to receiving a pitch from a neurodivergent filmmaker or a filmmaker with a disability that maybe does look a little bit different. And I think as long as it comes with a little bit of context um, as to why that might be, we're very interested in seeing that and engaging in new ways of being pitched to. I'm certainly not dogmatic about it. Ultimately, what I care about is that I understand the materials that I'm receiving and that there's a path to telling a great story.
And it looks like a lot of people are thinking about sending you acquisition pitches. So maybe we can take a moment to just talk a little bit about that. Obviously, there's only so many commissions that you can do in a year. And I don't know if you've actually, well, I guess you're not sure yet how many commissions you're planning on doing this year. You're going to wait till you see your envelope, I guess. But
Yeah, it's really tough to say. It tends to range from anywhere between 9 to 12 historically, and that is quite envelope dependent.
right. And then in terms of acquisitions, are you expecting that can something be at a rough cut and come in? Do you need it to be finished? How does the number of other partners that they've had play into whether you want to take it? Just sort of those different elements, because it looks like there's a lot of people planning on sending you acquisition pitches in the coming
Well,
weeks.
that's
Yeah.
very exciting. Certainly open to seeing a rough cut. I think as long as it comes with some caveats so that you can guide our eye a little bit, that's really helpful. Otherwise, we look at every cut. We take every cut at face value. We will just sort of, would rather you just sort of guide our eye than us make blanket assumptions based on what we're seeing. More often than not, the projects that we see are completed, I will say. In terms of rights, to be honest, it kind of depends, but we generally would expect at least 12 months of exclusivity within Canada for streaming and in Ontario for broadcast. It's particularly valuable to us when we have a premiere of some kind, an Ontario premiere, Canadian premiere. In the past, we've also been really fortunate to be able to get like North American and even world premieres in some cases. It's not a make or break, but it's certainly helpful for us to know. I feel like there was more to your question.
Can I jump in quickly?
Please,
Oh,
please.
I think if someone wants to send a rough cut, they could think about whether or not they want to be approaching us about a pre-buy. So a pre-buy would be when we come in before something is completed at a higher license level. And the reason that we would do that is if we see real potential in the project, we want to be able to input a bit. So we would have much less editorial input than we would on a commission, but we'd be looking at a rough and a fine cut. And also, we would have some logo representation and be sort of supporting the film if it is a film on its festival run, which is something that we're very supportive of. So there could be that. In terms of an acquisition, as Alexandra indicated, we'd usually be looking at something when it's done, but you never know if it's something that's a really timely topic, or something that feels really TVO, or, you know, there are different circumstances, of course.
Yeah, and I would say especially if you are submitting to a film festival, for example, or you know that you've been shortlisted, or maybe you know that you've been early accepted into a film festival, please let us know that. Don't be shy about letting us know that, because that's helpful context for us as well.
So for you, I mean, thinking about a film festival run, that's a consideration for TVO. It's something you're excited about.
Yeah, I would certainly. Oh, Natasha.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I would certainly say so. I think it's great for the film, right? And ultimately, it's great for us because it's great for the film. It helps to build a level of organic awareness that certainly draws viewers to the premiere when it happens on TVO. In terms of our holdbacks, it can kind of depend on the project, right? Like some films really get a lot of momentum and end up really benefiting from a longer festival run, and some don't necessarily need as long of a festival run, and they're really just looking for a relevant premiere, be that Hot Docs or, you know, any number of film festivals in Canada, North America.
Just to add to that, I think when it comes to a TVO originals or commissions where we're really investing in a project, we would want to get a sense from the team what their festival strategy is. So when we hold back and are excited and supportive, it's because we understand specifically the festivals, what the team wants to accomplish, and sort of our collective approach.
Mhm.
You know, I will say that what we want to avoid is sort of like an endlessly long festival run with many where we don't understand the strategy. And that's because often our projects have an element of timeliness.
Mhm.
And when we've invested heavily, we obviously want to bring it to our audiences. So it really depends, but we tend to be really supportive. We see awards and you know, festivals as a marker of success, which
Mhm.
is great, but you know, it's a conversation.
Very
And
true.
can you talk a little bit about your audiences when you're thinking about a film and you're thinking about like what is a TVO audience when you're analyzing a pitch and you're trying to think about how it's going to connect to them?
Actually,
Well,
we're
no, say, go.
no, I was just going to say we had some recent data come out of our audience development team, that we have a lot of newcomers to Canada that form our audience. So that's something that we're thinking about more and more, which kind of relates to your previous question. So we want to make sure that the content is really relevant to them. That's exciting too. And then we do find, particularly online, that we are hitting between the sort of 25 to 49 demo, which is exactly where we want to be. So we keep that in mind.
Your
We lost your audio, Natasha.
while Natasha's sorting out her audio, I would just echo that, you know, we really want to make sure that we're keeping that sort of 25 to 49 demographic in mind. We know that we have a very loyal broadcast audience, and that audience tends to skew a little bit older, and we certainly don't want them feeling neglected. And we are actively keeping an eye on programming that would be of interest to them as well. But at the same time, we're balancing that with the knowledge that we have some real interest from younger viewers, and that they tend to be a little bit more digital. A little bit. They're a lot more digital.
Yeah. And so in terms of reaching new audiences and bring them to TVO, it is a focus on the digital. That's where you're trying to reach, I guess, those younger viewers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And obviously, I might have missed this when I had an issue, but we are still have a very strong and loyal older broadcast audience, and we really
Yeah.
want to keep them happy.
Yeah.
And trust me, it's better to have me with my headphones falling out than for you to hear my very loud family at the moment. So thank you for your patience with my ridiculous headphone situation.
Yeah, I covered that a little bit, but I think it can't be overstated.
Okay.
My loud family?
No. Our dedication to our loyal older broadcast audience. It's a balancing act, you know.
Absolutely. And, you know, so it sounds like a lot of people are going to be preparing pitches for you. You've already said that, you know, you're thinking about projects that you're going to want to greenlight when you get your envelope in April.
Mhm.
right? So what's a perfect pitch?
There is no perfect pitch, Sarah. Nothing is perfect. I would say that in terms of elements, really giving us a sense of what kind of ride are we along for, like I said, we work in a visual medium, and I think any sense that you can give us of what kind of visual experience we're in for is really beneficial. It doesn't have to be a teaser. Again, it can be reference images, and I have even from personal experience gotten a ton of buy-in on projects just from really carefully composed treatments with reference images that help to convey the tone of my project. Is it uplifting? Is it guerrilla style? Is it black and white? I don't think that we haven't commissioned anything in black and white of recent that I'm aware of, but you never know. Maybe if you provide us with a really solid treatment that sells us on why it needs to be black and white, like, we're on board. I don't want to, never say never. I think a lot of the things that we discussed earlier about what we look for in a pitch are still true. And those are the things that we need in order to be able to envision a project on our slate. In terms of topicality, like, there really isn't one perfect topic. A lot of it has to do with delivery, and I think as well uniqueness too. It's impossible to think of a thought that's never been, well, it's not impossible to think of a thought that's never been thought of, but I think what we're really looking for is an understanding of why this film. It's a question that you get asked all the time by funders, but it really is true. It's like, why this film in particular and not any other film about a similar subject matter? And sometimes that could be, you're pitching a nature film and you're using a particular device that's never been used before creatively in the telling of a nature film. Or maybe it's an actual technology that's never been applied to the kind of story that you're telling. It doesn't have to be something as specific as that, but just starting to think about the way that you're going to make your film really stand out. And we don't want that to be gimmicky at all. We really want it to be authentic. That's the trick.
Okay. And then on the other side, so say you do commission a project, you're working with a filmmaker. What is the level of engagement with you that the filmmaker can expect editorially? How much, like, do you tend to give a lot of notes, or what can they expect that back and forth to be when you're involved at that level?
Yeah, it's so project dependent. We love to be as collaborative as possible. We also don't want to interfere in the creative process. And I would say that right now, with how small our docs team is, I personally would love to be able to be, even more involved in some of the projects than I have been able to at this stage. When it comes to rough cut, fine cut notes, again, it totally depends on where the project is at. We will give the notes that we feel are needed based on the state of the cut that we've received. Does that help to answer your question?
And I would say with our originals, we're quite involved. We want to be kept abreast of all creative choices. And then there's also a difference between projects. So, something that's sort of more of an auteur film, a feature documentary film, obviously we're still going to have notes. We're looking out for things that are especially important for us as an educational public broadcaster. Will also feed into creative in some ways. Whereas with a series, we're probably going to be more hands-on. We're going to look at shaping episode 1 very, very closely with you. We're looking at graphics. So, mirroring what Alexandra said, it depends on the project. And obviously we're here to support the creator's vision. And as said earlier, really, we want to set the teams up for success.
Yeah, and I think we do a good job of being really clear about what our expectations are from the get-go, and that will depend on the project. One thing that we really look for is the level of journalistic integrity across all of the projects that we commission, and so that doesn't necessarily mean that we need facts and figures randomly inserted into every project, but what it does mean is that we want to make sure people are checking their bias whenever possible. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 6, and you guys have given us an hour, and I'm really appreciative. There's plenty of questions we didn't get to, but I hope that maybe people could email you guys with any other questions that they have.
Yes, absolutely. I think the doc submissions email is probably the best place to be able to filter those questions so that they don't get lost. That email is on our website, but it is essentially docsubmissions@tvo.org. There are 2 S's, so docsubmissions@tvo.org.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much. We really are, we're really happy to have the opportunity to, introduce you both to the membership, field some questions. Hopefully we can do this again. Lauren, do you want to say any closing remarks?
Sure. I mean, thanks so much again, and for you, Sarah, to take the lead on fielding the questions. It's been a real pleasure, and I think it feels like it should be an ongoing conversation. There's a lot of query out there, and just in terms of volume, what are you guys looking at in terms of what you're taking, and like how competitive is it out there?
I'm going to take that one just because I probably know some of, there's a lot of participants in the discussion. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure I know many of you. I was in a role very similar to Alexandra's when I stepped in for Jane in 2016, 2017. So I have a sense of how the volume has changed, and it's unbelievable. The volume is huge. We're grateful. We're happy people are coming to us. That doesn't mean we don't have work to do in terms of discoverability. We know that we do in terms of us doing some work on talent discoverability. It's also obviously a sort of sad commentary on the documentary industry in Canada. We recognize that there are less and less places to go. It used to be in 2016, 2017 that if there was an amazing project that didn't fit with us, I would be able to make some suggestions of where that team could potentially take it. That's not really the case any longer. So I'd say that's also part of the issue with response time, which we do feel really bad about, is that the volume is huge, and we do truly look at everything. We don't take a meeting for everything. We don't bring everything to the larger team because it just would not be possible. But everything that feels like it could be a fit, we're talking about. But it's massive.
Yeah, it can't be stated enough. It's enormous. And again, very privileged, but some days it really does feel like I'm receiving every pitch for a documentary that there is to receive in the country.
And every unscripted series too, right?
And
so it's not just the independent filmmakers, it's every production company that's in the unscripted sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had that feeling just by the uptake, actually, with all of the people that have been joining us, and it's a robust community out here, and a lot of ambition, and yeah, I think that this conversation should keep going on and on, especially around the larger climate in Canada right now. But we'll be back for more, right, Sarah? So I want to thank you again for joining us, and everybody who joined us tonight. I want to give a shout out to Warren Chan, our programming and communications person, working the webinar in the background. And for all of you that joined us, I want to just let you know that we have an exciting workshop coming up next week. It's the Road to the Oscars, which will be facilitated by Ina Fishman, who was the producer of Fire of Love, which was nominated last year, 22, Oscar nominated. And we're bringing in the Tiger team, the Nisha Pahuja and her campaign team from To Kill a Tiger, to just talk about that bumpy road to the nomination process. So that will be next Monday, February 26th. I believe it's 5 to 7 ET. And so it's free, it's online. Please join us. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. And again, thanks Natasha and Alexandra for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Lauren, Sarah, and Warren. Oh, sorry, Alexandra.
It's fine. It's the lag. Thank you guys so much for having us. This has been really lovely.
Okay, have a nice evening, everybody.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.